Chairman Thompson, Vice Chair Cheney, representatives. I have spent 2 years investigating the origins of QAnon and its operators. It has not been an easy process to expose it, but what I've found is critical to understand. The rising tide of hate, extremism, and division we see in America today is not a natural phenomenon or even a political one. The increasingly bizarre, destructive behavior and incomprehensible beliefs shared by tens of millions of our neighbors, family, and friends leads the rest of us to wonder why and how. The answer is that the systematic radicalization of American citizens is the intended result of a psychological warfare attack conducted by American traitors aligned with Putin. This multi-pronged assault on the mind of American citizens is the same as a radiological, chemical, or biological attack on our bodies. We are witnessing the intentional artificial introduction of deadly material into our critical systems that affect the lives of every American. The only difference is that this attack is digital, not physical. It is not a chemical agent being spread. It is coercive propaganda, which has been engineered through social media to create undue influence, also known as brainwashing. So let's imagine we have a woman named Jane. She's 40s, got a couple kids. Say she's in Ohio. She's been a Democrat forever, but she lives in a pretty purple state. Imagine one day, right after church, a friend of hers, call her Laura, says, "Hey Jane, you ever talk about or you know anything about child trafficking?" Jane says, "Well, I certainly know it exists, and it's obviously terrible. Why do you ask?" She says, "Well, I'm in this group of people who's really trying to do something about child trafficking, and I wanted to send you a video just to kind of show you what we're up to." And Jane says, "Sure, of course." So Jane gets home, kids are outside, she grabs a glass of wine, looks at the video. The video is very strange to Jane. She doesn't quite understand what she's seeing. It says, "Cue, trust the plan." There's this, very sort of interesting but trance-like music going on. Boom, 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 boom. these horrible images of tortured and hungry and beaten kids. The answer, of course, to who did it? Well, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats and George Soros and Barack Obama, and that Donald Trump and Mike Flynn and Q are going to save these children. So Jane signs up for Telegram, joins the Facebook groups, starts investigating on her own. She does her own research. So, you can see how Jane, right, could go from being a normal person to going through a psychological experience that changes her and that gets compounded on. This psychological attack has directly led to the radicalization of tens of millions of Americans, including incubation of domestic terrorists like the 18-year-old white supremacist who murdered 10 black people in Buffalo. But of most relevance to this committee is the fact that the big lie that led to the insurrection was just a small part of a larger psychological warfare campaign being conducted by retired Lieutenant General Mike Flynn against American citizens. Flynn ran special operations, including PSYOPs, in Iraq and Afghanistan alongside Blackwater and Flynn's personal friend Eric Prince. Flynn rose to be the head of the DIA and was the first American to visit GRU headquarters before Obama fired Flynn in 2014 after Flynn failed to warn that Putin was invading Crimea. In December 2015, Flynn sat next to Putin in Moscow at a Russia Today gala along with Jill Stein. From that point forward, Flynn has been waging war on his own country. Everything he has done since then has benefited Putin. Everything. In the summer and fall, before the 2016 election, Flynn was responsible for weaponizing emails hacked by Russia and delivered through Russian cutout Guccifer 2 and WikiLeaks via Flynn's ally, Roger Stone. This included a psychological operation that came to be known as Pizzagate. Pizzagate was a remix of Russian propaganda and Gamergate, aimed at tearing down Hillary Clinton. This ultimately led to a man firing his gun in a pizza parlor because he thought Hillary was torturing children in the basement. Flynn ran these operations out of a political action committee called MAGA 3X. that Flynn started with Peter Thiel and numerous white nationalist trolls and hackers. These people included indicted insurrectionist Timothy Giannett, aka Baked Alaska, Trump's Twitter whisperer Justin McConney, Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, Jeff Kaseya, James Brower, Dan Scavino, and Mike Flynn Jr. In a speech right after the 2016 election, Flynn took credit for swinging the result to Trump through, quote, an insurgency and irregular warfare at its finest. Flynn named the people who participated in this election interference, quote, digital soldiers, and then Flynn immediately trademarked the term. It is important to note that a significant percentage of QAnon accounts identified themselves as digital soldiers, and a number of defendants in the January 6th attack identified themselves in their sworn testimony as digital soldiers. This is not a coincidence. This is psychological warfare. Flynn was fired as Trump's national security advisor for lying to the FBI about his communications with the Russians and was forced into a cooperation agreement with the DOJ that rendered him mute in 2017. In response, Flynn directed MAGA 3X to start a new operation to speak for Flynn that came to be known as Q, or QAnon. Q was simply Mike Flynn's alter ego, and for all intents and purposes, Mike Flynn is Q. Flynn planned, operationalized, and weaponized QAnon to radicalize millions and to fill his personal defense fund, which is how he could offer to pay a QAnon lawyer, Sidney Powell, to get him out of his cooperation deal. Three years after it began, on Election Day 2020, Q retired and the entire QAnon cult switched to the big lie at Flynn's direction. It was the QAnon network that pushed the big lie leading to the insurrection. On December 18, 2020, when a meeting in the White House with Flynn, Powell, and others failed to convince Trump's lawyers to go along with their plans to overturn the election, they secretly plotted physical violence with Trump. Hours later, Trump tweeted that there would be a wild protest on January 6th. 2 days after that, the administrator of the QAnon website, 8chan, Ron Watkins, offered to pay people to go to DC on January 6th. He did that on Twitter. It was QAnon with the help of white nationalists like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers that sent people to the insurrection. The big lie was QAnon, just rebranded. In summary, the man responsible for planning January 6th is Michael T. Flynn. He achieved it through psychological operations along with his co-conspirators at the Pentagon, who intentionally prevented the defense of the Capitol. These include Chris Miller, Ezra Cohen Watnick, and Kash Patel, as well as the then Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy and his Chief of Operations at the time, Mike Flynn's brother Charles. Charles Flynn hosted the January 6th video conference call that delayed the National Guard for hours. Then the Army lied about it. Now, unbelievably, Charles Flynn is commanding general of the U.S. Army Pacific with 90,000 American troops, which would respond to the growing potential for conflict with China. Mike Flynn continues to poison American minds at scale, deepening the national divide and intentionally pushing us towards civil war. Please understand that this attack, this psychological attack, is a weapon of mass destruction. It's just coming from the inside out. We are at war. We must recognize the enemy, understand it, and defeat it. We must shut down the Russian propaganda outlets and radicalization platforms, including Telegram, Fox, Newsmax, and OAN. It is impossible to help people back to reality when they are bathed in digital poison all day long. Please convene hearings and enact legislation to address this national security emergency. There is a vast industry devoted to converting our citizens into cult members, taking their money and weaponizing them. We need legislation that criminalizes online harm in the same way we do for the physical world. Psychological harm is harm. Finally, Donald Trump was not the source of the insurrection. He was the front man. The people who put Trump in the White House in the first place and then tried to steal the 2020 election to keep him there are still walking free. Finally, Merrick Garland, Mike Flynn is committing prima facie seditious conspiracy in public every day. Arrest Mike Flynn. Thank you.